Hi there. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about what Bitcoin is, um, how it came about, some of the features and inherent values that it has, and some of the problems that it solves, um, which is increasing its adoption really across the globe, both by individuals, businesses, and governments. So, Bitcoin came about as a thought experiment in some internet forums back in 2000, 2008 and 9, around the time of that last financial crisis. And there were this individual on the forum started to propose some ideas about a new store of value or a new currency that was purpose built for a digital world. And kind of what would the first digitally native currency and store of value look like? So I'll actually link to some of you can actually follow along, read the white paper, which proposes the initial idea and the benefits that it has, as well as I'll post in the description um, a link to the Satoshi white paper. There's like nuggets, so you can read kind of like the internet posts that kind of led to this idea, the ideas this person was proposing, the feedback they were getting from the forum members, etc., and um, really understand what the conversation that was happening around this time and why people were able to kind of get behind this idea and ultimately why it launched. So Bitcoin is essentially software um, written for that's open source. So that means anybody can use it. It's not owned by a single person, company, or government. It's free for anybody to use and run on their own system, which is also part of its decentralized nature, which we'll talk about. And so it is software that creates over time a finite supply of digital tokens or bitcoins that there will only ever be 21 million of. And the code uh, creates those bitcoins, the 21 million bitcoins, over time, um, slower and slower and slower and slower and slower. And so there's this finite supply of tokens is very different than most of our fiat currencies, which have really unlimited supply as we need more, as monetary policy, supports that we need more. We just create more dollars or create more, whatever the currency is. We create more of it, and we try to play this balancing act of supply and demand. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't, which leads to, asset bubbles or crashes. And so you really don't have any of that because you have this decreasing supply and finite supply of Bitcoin over time. And so as adoption and demand for it increases, the value will ultimately rise and eventually stabilize. And again, we'll get into this, which is a key component of a currency is stable value and a lack of volatility, which isn't the case yet. But there's a path for Bitcoin that could ultimately lead to kind of a more stabilized price and adoption that once adoption of Bitcoin kind of reaches its maximum amount, then you don't have these big volatile swings as you do kind of in its early days, which we're still in. So it's software built on cryptography that anybody in the world can use, which means it's decentralized. So, no one bank owns it, no one country owns it, no one person or company owns it. In fact, anybody in the world can run a small computer, run the code themselves, and transact in Bitcoin. Um, Companies have created apps like Coinbase and other apps for your phone to make the exchange of Bitcoin for things like US dollar, where you're just trading US dollars for Bitcoin. They've made that very easy, and they will hold your Bitcoins for you. But you don't the important thing to know is that you don't have to rely on those companies. You're choosing to. And so that's an important component is the decentralized nature. So I'll give you a quick example. So why this is important. So early last year, China banned Bitcoin mining, which is again a topic that we'll get into. But mining is the systematic creation of new Bitcoin over time, and many companies and people are doing that because it can be very profitable. And China had banned that, and a very large number of the worldwide Bitcoin miners were in China. Well, what happened is when China banned that, those companies started to shut down their computer systems. But because it was decentralized and there were computers running all over the world to support Bitcoin transactions, there was a temporary increase in the fees associated with moving Bitcoin from one place to another. But at no point in time were you unable to buy Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin, send Bitcoin to another person. And that's really important, because if you think about currencies and other stores of value, I mean, what happens if you're relying on a single government, single country, a single business? We've seen that in our lives. If there's a war, if one company's systems go offline, you're at the mercy of being able to transact, which may or may not be trivial. So that's really important, this decentralized nature of it. That also means it's very secure. So over time, and again, Bitcoin's built on the blockchain, which I noted in the first video. And the blockchain is a decentralized ledger of every single transaction that has ever taken place within the Bitcoin network since its inception. And so every 10 or so minutes, every set of transactions is there's consensus among all the Bitcoin nodes, or the majority of the Bitcoin nodes in the network. They agree upon those transactions, and those are written as a new chain as a new block to the end of the chain, which can never change. And so you could look back if you wanted to, and you wouldn't practically do this, but it's very important. You could look back from day one and see a history of every single transaction that's taken place on the blockchain, and it's immutable and can't be changed, which means there is no dispute of value, there is no dispute of ownership, there is no ability to change or otherwise manipulate the history and therefore ownership of who owns what Bitcoin. That is massively important from a security perspective, but also from a transparency perspective. So that's the kind of the underlying platform that it's built on. So digitally native software, currency, and store of value, built on cryptography for security, decentralized in nature to protect against single points of failure or bad actor nation states or bad actor individuals. Scarcity, right? So unlike other things we've talked about, scarce, finite supply to control the supply side of the equation. Immutable, so built on the blockchain. Immutable, so think like gold, right? So gold is immutable. You can melt it down, you can put it into bars, but you can't create more of it. You can't synthesize it from, or we haven't yet been able to create it from. There's no man-made gold. You can't reproduce it. It's immutable, and you can't change the chemical composition, or it's gold. You can change the physical form of it, but you can't change the like I said, chemical makeup of it. And then Bitcoin is also portable, which is important for a currency. So just like paper currency, and why paper currency was created in the first place, especially when it was tied to things like the gold standard, was because gold was heavy and non-portable. So paper money, which was, and coins, were tied to or created, and the value of those were tied to physical assets like gold and silver and other precious metals. But they were created for portability, so you could go from one place to the other, and people would. There was this predetermined value of the the paper money, which said, sure, I'm trading you this, and that is equal to some amount of gold or other precious metal. And so Bitcoin has ultimate portability, being able to be sent across the globe, really to any location, at any time, for a very small, a very, very small fee, and without any centralized authority saying, gatekeeping that transaction. So there's no clearing houses, there's no central banks, there's no Western unions, there's no, it is from point A to point B. The Bitcoin decentralized network takes care of that transaction, moves the Bitcoin from point A to point B for a very, very small fractional fee. And again, as we think about globalization, as we think as an increasingly networked world, as we think about increased volatility in instability of countries and the rise and falls of nations, this removes a lot of the concerns associated with fiat currencies, which are not tied to underlying assets, and in most cases have been removed. I'm not aware of any fiat currencies that are still tied to physical assets. The U.S. dollar was untethered from gold in 1971. So it's valuable because people think it's valuable. We agree it's valuable, and it's protected by currently the most powerful country in the world, but that can change, and we've seen history tell us time and time again. Even the largest empires and nations in the world eventually come to an end, and when they do, it's typically because of currency collapse. So, again, not to get too draconian in that regard, but just thinking about the importance of something like Bitcoin that isn't tied to one of those things, that isn't tied to a country, that this can be very important. So. Those bullets kind of summarize a little bit about what Bitcoin is. We'll talk a little bit more about, decentralization, specifically scarcity, how Bitcoin is created, a little bit more about the mining topic that I mentioned. But at this point in time, it's really just understanding that it has all of the values and characteristics of historical currencies and historical stores of value, in a digital and electronic form factor, which has never been created before. So I think we'll stop there for now. I'll try to clarify some of those topics in the next few videos. I know it's a lot to digest, but maybe we'll break down one topic at a time as we go forward. If you have questions, reach out to me about any of this, or just post a comment below, and I'll answer your question there. And hopefully there's some value. All right, thanks.